You might not like it. It might not be something that we want to happen to ourselves or to our family, to our loved ones, to our friends, but is it something that's going to become necessary for the survival of our country?
Congress is considering legislation that would update the military draft process. The proposals would automatically register men for the draft on their 18th birthday. It would also require women to enter.
So women have never been required to register for the draft, but that could soon change thanks to lawmakers on Capitol Hill.
This is part of the annual National Defense Authorization Act. As of now, the selective service is already mandatory for men between 18 and 24 years old. There's no military draft in place right now, but Congress and the president can reinstate the draft and force men to serve in the event of a national emergency or war.
All right, guys, so this video is going to be a response to my last video where I broke down what was going on with the potential military draft in 2025. Long story short, it doesn't look like there's going to be a military draft for 2025, but it does look like there's a potential for an automatic registration for selective service, which is the government's system to initiate a draft if a draft ever actually did happen in the future. Now, if you haven't seen that video and you're somebody who still needs a little bit more information, a little more clarity on that topic, I highly suggest that you go watch that video because I think I clearly break down everything that's going on with that subject in that video. So I will drop a link to that video in the description. Definitely suggest you go check that out. But in this video, I want to tease the idea on whether or not a military draft actually will become reality in the future, especially since we're having such a hard time meeting recruitment quotas and retention goals in our military today. Now, I'm somebody who's been in the service for over 17 years now. I have seen quite the evolution from my first day in the military to what it is today. And I can tell you that it is a completely different thing. It has completely transformed from my first day to yesterday. And personally, I'll be completely upfront with you guys. I myself have not determined for myself whether or not it's for the better or for the worse. I just haven't really quite decided yet. There's some things that are better and there's some things that are worse. But I cannot for certain tell you whether or not, in my experience, our military is better now than it was 20 years ago. But I can assure you, like I said, it is absolutely a different beast. But with that being said, the culture of the military has changed dramatically, and I think that the culture shift, a lot of that is due to the dramatic culture shift of the United States, especially with the younger generation and with the introduction of the information age and everything that we've seen with that. Things have just changed dramatically and very quickly. And those changes, all those changes, absolutely have a dramatic effect on our military and the way that the public views our military. And this has led to a lot of reasons for why the younger generation of Americans don't want to join the military. And a lot of times it doesn't even matter if they want to join or not. A lot of times they're just not qualified for service, whether it either be physical conditions or they are just not passing the ASVAB, which is the intellectual testing that you have to pass in order to get into the military. Which is crazy to think about because when I first joined the military, granted this was during Operation Enduring Freedom, I was a pack-a-day smoker, didn't have my high school diploma, and I don't think I've ever run more than a mile at that time. But hey, we got it all figured out. There was a lot of waivers at that time, but today it's a lot more stringent if you're looking to join the military. There's other reasons people don't want to join. A lot of times the money's not good enough, or they're afraid they're going to get hurt. They're afraid they're going to get PTSD because of all the PTSD issues that we've been having lately. They don't think the quality of life is going to be very good. They don't want to leave their family, or they just don't believe in the ideals of America as a whole, which I think is severely unfortunate. And that's a whole nother issue in itself, and I'm actually thinking about making a video on that topic, on whether or not America is broken. And I'll take that opportunity to pause right there and ask you guys on whether or not you think I should make a video on that. What do you guys think? Do you think America's broken? Do you think we have a systemic issue as an American society? Because from my perspective, it looks like there's definitely some serious issues that we as a country need to get figured out before it's too late. But anyway, so there are a lot of reasons why the younger generation does not not want to join the military, or they just can't because they don't qualify, right? I want to show you this news clip that I found. It just came out a few weeks ago, so it's pretty recent, it's pretty relevant. It breaks down the U.S. military recruitment shortfalls for the fiscal year 2023. I think it gives a pretty good roll-up of the situation that we're looking at, so I'm going to play this for you real quick. It's pretty short. Here we go.
When it comes to military recruitment in the U.S., new data shows few are able to serve, and even fewer are actually willing to. The Army, Navy, and Air Force are all falling short of their recruitment goals. In fiscal year 2023, among the 5 service branches, only the Marine Corps and the Space Force met their recruiting goals. The Army fell about 15,000 short of its goal to bring on 65,000 enlisted soldiers. The Air Force only got about 24,000 of the nearly 27,000 it was aiming for. And the Navy recruited just over 30,000 sailors, a far cry from its goal of 37,000.
So quick pause on that. Did you see that? The Army was short 15,000 recruits last year. That's insane. I'm obviously a little partial to the Army, right? I am a soldier, but that's really unfortunate, in my opinion.
And young people largely are not willing to change that trend for a variety of reasons. According to a survey from the Department of Defense, at the top of the list is fear of physical and emotional trauma. Leaving friends and family behind is also a big concern, and many have other career interests holding them back from military service.
Possibility of physical injury or death. That one seems a lot higher than I would anticipate, right? I mean, I guess it's a fair enough thing to be concerned with, but I'm just surprised to see that it's the highest percentage on there for why young Americans don't want to join the military. Possibility of PTSD or other emotional psychological issues. Totally understand that. Still surprised to see how high it is on the percentage scale, but that makes a lot of sense to me, especially since there's been a whole lot more research lately on that subject, and we've been identifying that PTSD is a lot more common than we used to think in the past. And we still, as a society and really just as humanity, don't quite understand PTSD as a whole or how to treat it super effectively. You know, I'm here to tell you PTSD is absolutely a real thing. I have plenty of friends that have very severe PTSD. I would say I suffer from PTSD. I find ways to cope with it, but it is absolutely a real thing, so that's completely understandable. Leaving family and friends, yeah, I mean, that is definitely understandable as well. I hate it when I have to leave my family when I go on my deployments or my TDYs, even my short little 2-week spurts of trainings that I have to do. I hate leaving my family. Other career interests, that's totally understandable. There are a lot of other good careers out there. Not everybody needs to be in the military, right? I mean, you can go be a doctor, an astronaut, or whatever else you want to be. You can go be a welder. I mean, there's tons of other career choices out there. For me, you know, I think I'm pretty fortunate. I always think that my calling, if there is such a thing, was to be a soldier or something like that. I think if I wasn't a soldier, I would have been like a crab fisherman or oil driller or something like that. I don't know. I just like the hard life. You know, for some reason, I get like satisfaction from being miserable sometimes. As crazy as that sounds, maybe that's the PTSD talking. And dislike of military lifestyle. That's totally fair too. I mean, I guess I can't complain too much about that. The military lifestyle absolutely is not for everybody. It's most of the time not fun at all. But you do get a lot out of it. I mean, you learn how to be responsible. You learn the value of discipline. And you learn how to not take things for granted. That's for sure. Not to mention, you get a lot of really good skills out of the military, guys. If you're somebody who's on the fence on joining the military, you get paid to go out there and learn some really great skills that you can then bring back into the civilian sector, all right? So even though you have to like do what you're told and maybe you get yelled at when you're in boot camp for a little bit, it's not as bad as you might think. It's not as bad as the movies make it seem. All right, so now I want to get into the main topic of the video, and that is whether or not a draft is actually going to become necessary for our country because our recruitment numbers are suffering so badly.
Now, before we begin to unpack how to solve the issue of falling military recruitment, it's important to understand what is at stake if we don't, as national security threats mount from Iran to Russia to China. Does the U.S. have the manpower and firepower it needs?
The national security implications are stark, Haley. You're talking about effectively a hollowed out force. So basically what you're talking about is brigade combat teams. You know, think about the military fights on the ground in brigade combat teams. That's the kind of structure in which we fight. Brigade combat teams without enough qualified soldiers. You're not meeting the readiness marks that we traditionally would meet before we send our brigade combat teams into harm's way. And, you know, that is a real risk for national security and for our objectives as a country.
And that's coming at a time the U.S. is dealing with multiple global issues: Russia's war in Ukraine, Iran and its proxies in the Middle East, and China. So I'm curious, do those challenges with military recruitment stand to impact the U.S. response? Is the U.S. prepared should any of these theaters escalate further?
You know, we almost need like a whole of society concern or a whole of society focus, you know, on this recruiting shortfall and what this means for the country.
See, so what he just said right there, I totally agree with. I think it's a cultural, a society, systemic problem as to why we're not meeting our recruitment goals. And I think we need a serious shift in that culture in order to improve anything. We have to have a reason as a country, and especially for the younger generation, to why we should be volunteering for military service. But is that culture reshift something that is actually attainable? I don't know.
So I do want to talk about a little bit more data, because more than 2 in 3 Americans say it's important for the United States to be #1 militarily. That's according to the most recent Gallup survey in 2022. American confidence in the military has declined over the last 5 years. So from your perspective, how should the military restore Americans' confidence?
That's a pretty interesting statistic, right? So 2 out of 3 Americans think that we should have the strongest military in the world, but I would venture to bet, and we'll see what happens with the comments of this video, that a good majority of Americans would say that they're not going to join the military because of this, that, and the other. So they want one thing, but they're not necessarily willing to support it personally. And I'm coming back to that last video. You should see some of the comments that came across on that video. I mean, there were some very not too happy with America comments as part of that video. It's actually kind of illuminating to see, because it gives you an idea on how Americans really feel. I will also say I am willing to bet that a good majority of those comments are probably adversarial psyop, okay? It's probably people from other countries that are writing comments, and they're acting like they're Americans, and they're acting like they're pissed off Americans to try to influence other Americans to think poorly about America. It happens more than you would think, guys. It happens an awful lot. But anyway, those comments are still pretty illuminating, and I think it's crazy to see that survey data says 2 out of 3 Americans think that we should have the strongest military, but doesn't seem like 2 out of 3 Americans want to actually serve in the military.
Well, I think the military should stop focusing on the social movements. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is very important, and it's very important that our military looks like our country. That's very important. But what we need to focus on in terms of our messaging is our readiness, combat capabilities, AI, those kind of things. I think, you know, people in the Midwest, people who traditionally sign up for military service, they don't want to hear about the woke army. They don't want to hear about these social movements and these social aspects of the military. They want to hear about, you know, being a warfighter. They want to hear about combat readiness. And that's really where our messaging needs to be. I think our messaging has gone astray here the last 3, 4, 5 years.
Honestly, I can't agree with what he's saying there enough, okay? I think people are tired of hearing about the woke military. They're tired of these social movements happening within the military. I do think that is a product with so many social movements happening in America, and the military, the American military, is made up of Americans. So anything that comes from Americans are going to be brought into the military, and the military is going to have to adapt to what American culture is doing at the time, right? I mean, that only makes sense. So you can't be too mad at the senior leaders of the military for trying to adapt to the situation at hand. But I absolutely think that we might be missing the mark personally. I think that the wokeness, you know, we don't need to get into that anymore. I really think we need to get back to readiness and what it means to be a United States military service member. It's not easy. I don't care what anybody says. You know, I'm here to tell you, not everybody is going to be able to hack it in the United States military. They just can't. Unless we're talking about the Air Force, of course. Totally just kidding on that one. But you guys know what I'm getting at, all right? There is going to be a certain amount of grit, tenacity, and discipline required for anybody who wants to have a successful career in the military. And even if you put the career aspect to the side, to be able to successfully operate as military personnel, you have to fit a certain mold in order to be effective, which contributes to overall military readiness. And that's on behalf of the defense of our country's interests. It has to be the right person in the right place in the right uniform with the right mindset. But even if we circle back to that, we only recruit those sorts of people, Is there enough of a recruiting pool to pull from? We've already determined that that may not be the case. So now we're circling all the way back. Is a draft actually going to be something that is necessary for the security of our country? It's a really important question, and it's definitely something that we all should be thinking about as Americans. I think it's our duty to understand as much as possible what's really going on with this situation and get as much information, some viable information in regard to this situation, and really decide for ourselves, like, what are we getting ourselves into here? I'm curious on what you guys think. I like to use these videos to spark constructive conversations. So whatever you guys think or your feelings on this subject, please drop that in the comments. I'm sure there are a lot of different opinions on the subjects out there, some good, some not so good. But I'm also willing to bet that there's a lot of really good, unique viewpoints and educated viewpoints that you should not keep to yourself. You should share that with the community for everybody to see. Because again, that's only going to help to drive constructive conversation and constructive thoughts and hopefully develop some constructive ideas in the end. Ideas that can hopefully get us out of the mess that we're in today, even if it's just an inch at a time. That's all I have for you guys today. Hopefully I got your brain juices moving enough to give you something important to think about. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you found this information useful. If you like this sort of content, stay safe out there. And besides that, I will see you on the next one.